Awesome. Okay, we're live. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. We'll give people a few minutes to join us. We don't have any viewers yet. Oh, it looks like we have two. Okay. We'll give everybody a minute or two to join since we just started, and I'll be right back. Thanks everybody for joining. Okay, we've got a little icebreaker to get us started. We'd love to hear what your first thoughts are when you hear the words cloud migrations. So feel free to just contribute in chat or wherever you're live streaming from. You can throw your comments in there. Great. Thanks everybody for joining. You guys, we've got about 25 and climbing viewers so far. So I think we can go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining our DigitalOcean Sail to Success webinar. We've got a great group of panelists today talking to you guys about cloud migrations done right. So with that being said, I'll hand it off to Purnima, who's going to introduce everybody. Over to you,
Hi
Purnima.
everyone. Thank you, Grace. So, hi everyone. Purnima this side, Senior Solution Architect at DigitalOcean. I am in DO from last 7 years, and I mostly look into the pre-sales part of the world. Now, I will hand it over to my colleagues to introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Joe Keegan. I recently joined DigitalOcean as part of the Migration Services program. I come from VMware, where I spent about half a decade working with service teams running on public cloud, enabling them to adopt cloud-native architectures and just generally focus on their availability, performance, cost, all those good stuff when it comes to public cloud. Over to you, Rob. Rob, you're muted.
How's that? Sorry about that, everyone. Hi, my name is Rob. I'm also new over here, a senior solutions architect too, with a focus on migrations. I come from MariaDB for the past 5 years, where I worked as an enterprise architect, and looking to kind of keep going with that here.
Hi. Hi, guys. So now I will take it over and let me talk about few things here. So let's be honest. Whenever we hear about cloud migration, we can feel overwhelming, right? But because the reason is you got data, dependencies, deadlines are there. And of course, there is a worry of having a downtime when we hear about the migration. We want to do a migration from on-prem to other cloud or from one cloud to another cloud. So it is altogether a different feeling of overwhelmed when we hear about these things. But in this particular session, it is designed in a way so that we will demystify all of these things. So we will explore how to move smarter, not harder, using Kubernetes, DigitalOcean managed Kubernetes, managed database services we offer on DigitalOcean, and also a battle tested strategies. So here today, we are going to walk you through some of the real world best practices to minimize the risk, keep things simple, to peek into DigitalOcean tools, POC supports that can turn the trial into drum, a life cycle view from the first plan to the final cutover, and even post migration support that you are going to get from DigitalOcean, and also strategies to seamlessly migrate to manage DigitalOcean offering DOKS and the managed database offering, that is DBaaS, we offer on DigitalOcean, all while keeping automation in the mind. Basically, we are giving you a cheat code that you can use for your migration process. Now, in the next slide, I will be talking about some of the common pitfalls and the smart prevention. So now, before we run, let's talk about what trips most people up, right? So migration don't fail because people are not smart. They fail because the little things are there that get missed out, like having a not talking about or not thinking about a workload inventory, not validating the test environment, not having a staging server and testing out the stuff before going to a production environment, having a poor rollback or having a no backup plans itself. So that is also one of the reason, and also ignoring the compatibilities like firewall rules, GTIDs, and also the versions of the databases and the Linux OS or even the Kubernetes versions when you are going to run. So but the cool part is we have seen all these mistakes while the migration customer has done, so we have built a way around them. So if you remember nothing else today, remember three key things which is like really important for the smooth migration. First is preparation, validation, and collaboration. Preparation, validation, and collaboration. And how you are going to handle these things, I'm going to cover in the avoidance tactics slide. Now, in the next slide, will be your basically a playbook which you are going to use here. So avoiding failure is not a luck. I will say it's the entire process what you build for any stuff, even for the migration. So I'm going to relate this in the terms of the migration, right? So let's start with the discovery itself. So knowing your workload is important, dependencies, performance baseline, what is your expectation? Say if you want to have a system, you want to know what's your expected input output, disk IOPS, you need to know these things. So you need to know this at the discovery stage, you need to know about these things, you need to know what you are running currently. So these knowledge will going to help you out. Then moving to the staging, create a safe place where you are going to test the real world scenarios. And then don't forget to make use of DigitalOcean POC support that we are going to offer you, because we don't want you to fly solo at the journey of the cloud migration. And one other aspects what we have seen, like bringing the tech expert from your team or from DigitalOcean team at the later stage. So the migration is not just about the tools what we are offering, what the tools you are going to use, it's also about the different people from different departments doing a collaboration and working together smartly. And with the right tactics, migration isn't just a risk. It won't be a risky case, right? It is a competitive advantage what you are going to get here. And finally, our migration tools, solution architects are here to guide you, troubleshoot, and make sure you are not doing all the cloud migration stuff alone. We are along with you, we want you to be successful. And how you're going to achieve those things, how our solution architect is going to help you out with the managed databases and managed Kubernetes, you will see in the coming slides. So now I will hand it over to my colleague to deep dive into the Kubernetes migration plan. Thank you.
Thanks, Purnima. Again, my name is Joe Keegan. I'm going to be covering the Kubernetes portion of this migration talk. And I'm going to start by talking about a little bit of what DigitalOcean Kubernetes Services, or DOCS for short, why we think it's a compelling offering. And then I'll talk through the 5-phase migration that we do when we help customers migrate to DigitalOcean. So let's start with talking about DOCS. So DOCS is a fully managed Kubernetes service, meaning that we manage both the control plane and the nodes. So we take care of monitoring all the control plane, scaling it, upgrading it, all that good stuff. And then the nodes, again, we deal with upgrading them, monitoring, managing them. All you really do is just choose how many you need, and that could either be static or it could do through an auto-scaling type of configuration. And DOCS, we run CNC, we're CNCF certified, so we run upstream Kubernetes, the closest to vanilla that you're going to get outside of running it yourself. And we think that that's compelling because it ensures that if you can run in DOCS, you can run anywhere. There's very minimal, if any, kind of lock-in or special stuff that you need to worry about in DOCS. So it's not like you're going to deploy there, want to maybe also deploy on-prem or deploy in another cloud as well, and you have to worry about how your configuration is going to change. We're vanilla. We're as close as you're going to get to upstream. We deal with enterprise scale, so we provide 1,000 node support. We think that covers the vast majority of people, the companies, use cases that are the size that is needed for most companies' use cases. And we offer a hyperscaler SLA. So, we're able to provide a much better TCO, 30% less than hyperscalers, while still providing hyperscale SLA. So that's a compelling reason there. And given that it's a DigitalOcean service, has DigitalOcean DNA. We focus on simplicity, deploying the cluster. It's very simple, just a few clicks in the UI, or potentially just a single resource in an infrastructure as code configuration. And it's cost effective. I'm going to talk a little bit about cost on the next slide, but again, we often see 30% TCO reduction running in a comparable hyperscaler. So let's talk deep dive a little bit on Docs features. So like most cloud providers, we have VPC, which is a private cloud network, and our Docs clusters are fully integrated with that network, meaning that your pods running in Docs, they get an IP address, but there's no NAT, there's no masquerading that's going on. You have visibility to that IP address from one pod to another, whether that's pods in the same cluster and another cluster and a cluster in a different region. It makes configuration and management much easier. Related to that, we also have managed Cilium operator. This provides Cilium Hubble, which provides great network observability for your flows between different pods or in and out of the cluster. We also configure Cilium to run in a full eBPF or kube proxy replacement configuration. So that greatly improves your performance and minimizes some networking headaches you have to worry about when you're dealing with kube proxy. We have routing agent that allows you to easily configure routing within the cluster to route through NAT gateways or VPNs or to other regions, and to make deployment of applications simple. We have a one-click marketplace, so you can choose applications, say like network availability applications, web servers, CMSs, that kind of thing, within our marketplace, and you can deploy it easily through just one click in the console. Or what I like to do is that all these marketplace apps are all supported by Helm. They're all based on Helm, and then we have a Helm value file that we use to configure Helm when you click the button in the console. And I've used those same value files when I deploy via infrastructure code or pipeline. So it gives a great baseline for how you should configure in an automated deployment as well. Let's talk a little bit about the cost effectiveness of Docs. Like I said, it's a 30% less TCO than what you're going to see in other hyperscalers, or on average. So how do we achieve that? Many of the ways we do this is just through the way we billing, through how the cost model of the service is done. And that includes things like a free control plane. So if you have non-HA use cases, say stage, tests, you're spinning up clusters for validation of other reasons, those control planes are of no cost to you. So you don't have to worry about, do I deploy this other cluster to validate it? And if I do, I'm going to spend X amount of dollars. You can just do it as a non-HA control plane, no cost. We manage the nodes, as I mentioned before, and there's no additional cost related to managing nodes. So we deal with all the upgrades, all the scaling up and down, that kind of thing. And you don't have to worry about it for no extra cost. Surge upgrades and productive node building, those two items, they kind of go together, right? So like surge upgrade, what we mean by this is that when you're upgrading a cluster, typically what happens, you deploy new nodes that have the newest version of the operating system, or operating in Kubernetes, whatever, whatever you're upgrading. And until that new node is running and the old node has gone away, you don't pay for any extra node costs. So you don't have to worry about, well, if I'm upgrading my cluster, does it double my cost for the period of time for upgrades? And you don't have to worry about that. Again, it's like, DigitalOcean, we're looking for very predictable billing. And the productive node billing, because we manage the nodes, we ensure that you don't get billed until that node is starting to actually do workload. So if a node is booting up, it takes 10 minutes to boot up, it get configured, added to the cluster, pods getting started on it. You don't pay for those nodes until you start running workload on it. Like all other features of DigitalOcean, we have generous bandwidth allowance. So for each of your droplets, you get a certain amount of bandwidth that's included in that droplet, and that gets pooled across all your droplets. So we find that for many, many use cases, people are able to just live within this bandwidth allowance, and it doesn't increase their bandwidth costs, egress or ingress costs, and it provides for that predictable billing. We have a digital ocean container registry, which you can use, and the biggest, or a big benefit of using it is that container pulls and pushes through to the container repo. That they don't take any. There's no billing associated with that action from the container registry. So you can pull and push containers as much as you like, and you don't have to worry about those costs adding up from a container registry point of view. And lastly, we provide free proof of concept and migration support for qualified workloads. So if you're running on another cloud, you've got a workload that's billing $2,500 or more a month, we're very happy to work with you to prove it out in DigitalOcean, figure out what configuration works for you, and then walk through this 5-phase migration that I'm going to talk about in the next slides. So let's talk about the next. Before we get to the next slides, I wanted to mention that no two migrations are the same. So if some people are going to have a single cluster, some people are going to have multiple clusters, some people are going to have different mixes of how they're dealing with stateful workloads versus stateless workloads. We have to customize the migration for each customer. And the 5 phases that I walk through next will be heavily customized. What I'm going to talk about is kind of the default of the vanilla, right? But for every phase, we're going to consider how do we need to apply this to you? What do we need to do to make sure that you're successful? So the first 2 phases of our 5-phase process is discovery and inventory, and then planning and design. And discovery and inventory, like Purnima said, one of the biggest things we see trip up people is that they don't necessarily know what they're running. They think they do, and they know the highlights, right? But the details sometimes may elude them. Maybe they set up ones they don't remember. They've inherited something. They don't know all the configuration. So we can really help figure out what exactly you're running, what is important, what do we need to worry about migrating, what maybe can stay behind. We understand all the dependencies and traffic flow. Are you using specific custom resources? What kind of load balancer are you using? How is cluster traffic entering and exiting the cluster? Get all that down. If you are using custom resources or even Kubernetes APIs, you might have to consider how to update those when you go to a new cluster. If you're running an old cluster, things like deployment or whatever. The API versions might be a little old, and you'll have to update your manifest to apply to new clusters. And we can help you do that. We can help you plan that out. We can help you identify where it needs to happen. And then the scaling, right? Do we do static scaling? Do we auto scaling? If you're auto scaling, what metrics are you auto scaling on? So we can figure that all with you. And then we move on to planning design. We take all that information from discovery, figure out a plan of migration, the strategy. Do we migrate all the stateless workloads first, then move on to stateful? Do we do it on an application by application basis? What kind of integrations do you need? Are you going to be using database as a service? Rob will talk about how the migrations work there. Is object store needed? Are you using a specific controller that was specific to your cloud provider, and we need to find a different one for that's a more vanilla one, right? So we work all that out, and then we have a plan of what are the steps, what are the specific sort of waves of migration that we're going to do. Then we set up the proof of concept, and we do a staging migration. So in this case, we're going to set up an environment. We're going to work to codify that environment as infrastructure code as much as possible. So not only setting the clusters, but making sure that when you're deploying your applications, you're doing it from manifest or Helm charts that are put in a version control repository. We know that what we deploy on one phase is going to happen, is the exact same thing is going to happen in another. Get your containers into the container registry, and then deploy your initial test workloads. So we get these running. We make sure that everything's running the way that we want, and then we develop a validation test suite. And this is as automated as we can, and we want to make sure that we have an automated way to run this test suite multiple times so that we know that it's done in a consistent way. We don't want humans just clicking things. They might miss something, or they may not click things the right way. So we get the test suite sorted out. And at that point, you should be comfortable. We're comfortable. We understand how things are going to get migrated over, how they're going to run at DigitalOcean. Then we do the production migration. So in this case, we recreate the production environment using all the infrastructure as code that we set up before. And we're going to run a environment validation. So using the validation that we had ran before. And this is not, production workload at this point. It's just to make sure the environment is running. We want to make sure that the landing zone where we're going to, it's good, right? It's functional the way we expect. Get data replication set up. We would have done this in staging migration, but we'll do this again as production. Validate that the data is replicating the way that we want it to, and then we get the prod workloads deployed. Then do the cutover, and the cutover is going to be some coordination between ensuring data replication is right, DNS switchovers, those kind of things. And in some cases, or in many cases, you'll see some downtime, but we'll do what we can to minimize that. It should be very, very brief in most cases. And then once the migration is done, then we do a handoff, right? So it's not like we just go away, okay, the last validation test is passed. We're good with the migration. See you later. So we do a migration handoff with our technical account managers. They're the ones that are going to come in. They're going to understand your business. They're going to understand how you're using DigitalOcean, what other things that DigitalOcean could do to better serve your business, and they're going to be your partner in working with DigitalOcean for your time here. And then we'll also connect you up with DigitalOcean Premium support. So if you have that issue, 3 a.m. in the morning, and you need someone to help out, you'll have someone to be able to call, and they'll be able to help troubleshoot. So that covers why I think that the Docs is a really compelling option for people looking to run Kubernetes in the cloud. How it's cost effective, again, 30% TCO on average versus a hyperscaler. And then the 5 phases of our migration process we go to get you over and running successfully in DigitalOcean. With all that being said, I'm going to hand you over to Rob, and Rob is going to talk through how we handle things on the database side. Rob?
Thank you very much, Joe. And just a quick note, I do see a question in the chat, and we'll get to that after we cover, everything up front. We'll hopefully have some time for Q&A at the end. So, again, now that you've got your workload on Kubernetes moved over here with Docs, then you might have questions about, well, how do you get your relational database over here, particularly if it's quite large? So I'm going to talk today a little bit about our Managed MySQL implementation and how we help with migrations for that. So again, let's start with, how do our managed databases help you, right? What's kind of the point of this, compared to something else? So, we offer free daily backups, one-click deployment, read-only nodes, encryption at rest, predictable pricing, all the kind of things you'd expect from a DigitalOcean service. Everything to kind of make your life a little bit easier for managing what's going on here, right? And, likewise, if you think about trying to do all that yourself, self-manage, you're having to deal with updates, which we take care of for you with manage, scaling out, right, to deploy new replicas, handling all of the switchover for that, everything else, and recovery, right? What happens if something goes down, and is out? How do you switch over, conveniently, right? Let alone all the security configuration and everything else. We're here to help you every step of the way with managed database is the key point. And so the biggest part of that is getting here, right? So how do you bring it over safely? And the about 4 major steps we look at on our side. First is validating compatibility, which is checking your version and also checking what configurations you're relying on, where you're at right now. The next one is proof of concept. So once we know that everything's going to be capable of being compatible, does it perform the way that you need it to? Does it, is the compatibility there when you put it in production, right? So before we even get to production, we're going to work on how to make sure everything's going to go well once we're over here. And then once we validate that, preparation, the migration is one component, right? But being ready to migrate, doing everything in advance, getting all that set up, that's something a little bit different. That's something we also help you with step by step. And then doing the migration itself. And this is the part DigitalOcean's made pretty easy because we've got it's just a couple of buttons, you click them, it'll take care of most of the process for you. And so we'll walk through how that works and again, how to prepare for that, how to monitor that, and how to follow up, once it's done and anything else you need to do on that front. So, again, first taking a look at how do we grab your version, configuration, and everything. If that's something you're not confident in your current environment for how to do, our solutions architects will walk you through how to do that. We'll also take a look at your configuration if you'll allow us, and we'll compare it to what we've got on our managed database side. For any divergences, we'll recommend solutions, and we'll also take a look with our expertise on is there anything that we could improve during this process too. making a migration like this for a large database in particular is oftentimes a convenient, time frame to go and say, okay, is there something that we could do differently that might be a little bit better for best practice, or might be a little bit better for the modern versions of MySQL we might run, once we're done migrating. So now that we know everything's going to look good and we're able to target the managed database environment, we want to work on the proof of concept. So for that, we're going to look at key performance metrics that we want to hit in the new environment primarily. So the easiest way to start with that is, what's the current environment that you're running in look like? How does that work? How well is that working for you? One of the really easy things we like to do if we're able to is if you have a way to run a standardized benchmark like Sysbench, OLTP, or anything like that. If you're able to run it in your environment and then we can run it in ours, we can take a look and make sure that just from an infrastructural standpoint, everything's matching up the way we expect it to. And if it's not, we can either adjust for that or, identify anything that's going to change kind of from point A to point B. And if you're going to run a benchmark in your environment, we do recommend that you don't do it on a production, nodes. If you've got a production primary, don't run a benchmark on that, please, unless you're going to schedule downtime or anything like that to do it. If you have the ability to deploy like a new replica that nothing else is routing to, that's always a great way to do it. If you have a sub-production environment, that's also great. So, we can, again, our solutions architects can work with you on all the caveats there and kind of what you can do and what the impacts might be. And then if there are any divergences, positive or negative, we can also work through identifying what they are and how to get, either work around them or work with them or improve on them. But if either you can't do benchmarking or even if you do benchmarking, we also like to look at your actual use case, right? So your database is more likely than not powering an application or maybe multiple applications. I use an example of, say, a ticketing application where maybe you have a support team with 50 engineers, say 25 of them are in one region, 25 in another. And maybe the number one thing they do every day is they log in, they go to a dashboard. That dashboard pulls the top tickets from, that they're, available to work on. And they may reload that constantly to make sure that they're seeing anything that comes in new from customers, any new prioritizations, anything like that. How long that dashboard takes to load is typically a function of a large number of database queries that, are all running in the back end on your MySQL database, right? The latency of how long those collectively take to get that dashboard to load for your engineer is usually a very important business metric. And I'm sure you can adapt this to many other application types or websites you may be running. But if you think about that in general, you think, okay, one of the things you're going to be worried about is the new environment going to handle that performance well so that your team isn't waiting longer than they have been, right? And so we want to identify with you queries like that we can look at and say, okay, if we run them, in the new environment, how long did they take compared to the old environment? And, can we test that out? Can we bring the data over? Can we run those queries over here? Can we make sure they're delivering the performance we want? So that's part number one. And then part number two that we look at is concurrency, right? So talk about the other, maybe you have 25 engineers in one region, 25 in another. Maybe Wednesday morning at 8 a.m., both sets of 25 engineers are on at the same time. And maybe it's for some kind of, meeting or something to that effect, but that maybe this happens once a week. At that point, now the system has to handle 50 concurrent users reloading the dashboard just in case anything happens, right? And so we also want to, identify any business cases like that and be aware of the maximum, throughput or anything like that we need concurrency-wise, so that when we're doing testing during the POC, we can validate and make sure that in those worst-case scenarios or in those expectable worst-case scenarios, that what we're providing is holding up. And if it's not, we want to look at what we can do there to make sure everything's good to go. So once we're confident that the solution is going to perform the way that we want it to and that you need it to, and that you're going to have a good experience on that front, we can now move to the next step, which is going to be to prepare to migrate. So to smoothly prepare to migrate, I'm going to cover this really high level, but again, remember that, you have the option of talking to DigitalOcean throughout this process. If you are eligible, we'll work with you with a solutions architect as well to help cover all this, in more detail and tailor it specifically to your migration. As Joe mentioned earlier, like no two migrations are the same, right? But at a high level, the first thing we recommend is a little bit of spring cleaning, which is any data, any rows, anything like that might be in your current database that doesn't need to be there. And I say need, in terms of like, maybe it's just data that is old, you don't have to hold on to it. Maybe it's data that was supposed to be temporary. Kind of just looking through your use case and identifying anything like that. If there's anything that you're able to remove or delete out or drop or anything like that, the less data and the fewer rows overall that are in your database, the less there is to migrate. And that doesn't just help for the migration, but that also helps going forward as well. So there are fewer rows in a table. Maybe it's just data that was supposed to be temporary. Maybe it's data that was supposed to be your reads and lookups and inserts, everything are generally going to go a little bit faster. So that'll benefit you straight up either way. But if you can't, that's okay. It's just kind of where we recommend to start. So the next thing, once you've kind of done what you can do there, is to make sure that global transaction ID is enabled, otherwise known as GTID or GTID. We'll walk you through from a solutions architect's perspective, or just even if you have questions at DigitalOcean during the process, let us know if you have any questions there. And again, we can help you with the specifics for your current environment for how to get that going. There are some variations depending on the specific version of MySQL you're running, and if you're running any kind of other variation of that too. So we'll help you with all that. Once you've got that enabled, the next thing we'll look at is binary log retention. And again, we can walk you through the specifics of that, but the high level is basically that the longer or the more days, the more seconds that you're able to retain the binary log on the source that you're migrating from, the more flexibility we have for if anything takes longer during the migration. Say there's a networking hiccup, or say even maybe your source is a little bit overloaded or something to that effect. Well, we want to work to avoid those situations. In most of those cases, we prefer that the migration complete rather than it abort partway through because it ran out of entries to be able to keep applying. So after that, allowing remote connections. And this can be a little bit closer to the time of actually being ready to migrate. Like the first few ones you can kind of do at any point. But these next ones, I'd say wait until a little bit closer. So for allowing remote connections, again, we'll walk through with this on the MySQL side. There's a couple of things we want to take care of there. Bind address is the biggest one, to not set to anything localhost, and to instead set to be able to receive connections externally. But also, for your current environment, if you have any firewalls, if you have anything that controls access, generally we want to open that up so that our tools are able to connect and you're able to pull data without issue. You'll also want to make sure you pause any backups, any tasks like that, backups, updates, anything of that regard on the source node. So now for that, if you're, depending on what node you're using as a donor, say you've got multiple MySQL databases, they're all part of the same replication cluster. If you want to take backups still from a node that's not the one that's going to serve as the donor for the migration, that's completely fine. You can run a bias as well, so we can make sure that sounds okay. But generally that's okay. The key thing we're worried about is making sure that the node that's going to be involved in migration, we don't want to run a backup on there because that can cause locking or other problems that could derail the migration. So just pause that for now. And then the other thing we want to do, and this you can do as close as possible, is to create the migration user. And the reason why I recommend this one being pretty close to the time of the migration is just because with MySQL in particular, that user has to have super permissions, which unfortunately isn't the case for a lot of other databases. But here, we don't want to add a super user permission, for any longer than required, basically. But when you create this user, be sure to save the username and password because we're going to use them shortly. And so once you have all this set up, it's time to actually do the migration. So for that, once you set up your managed database at DigitalOcean, you'll have this interface where you can go in and manage your managed database. Usually in the top right, though again, this may vary based on how you're accessing the website. You'll see a little button that says Actions. As part of that, there'll be an option for Setup Migration, and you'll go ahead and click that to get started. So once you click that, you'll see a screen like this. I do want to make a quick note at the top. You'll see something that says Hostname. That's a drop down. There's about 3 different options there you can select from. So if you're looking at this form and you're not quite sure how to fill this out for how to connect to your source database, click that top one, see if any of the other options, one of them is like a connection string, for example, see if those work better for you. And you can always use that. Also, again, you can always ask DigitalOcean questions throughout this process at any point. We'd be happy to help. So you're going to enter in here, though, the host name or the IP address of the database that you're going to migrate from. You're going to give the port and everything. We give the default MySQL port there if you're using just that. And then the username and password that you're going to enter here are going to come from the migration user you created in the last step. So that's why we save those. We're going to enter those in here. And then once you get everything entered, you can go ahead and click on Test Connection. If any errors come back from that, feel free to try re-entering and retrying the test. If any of that doesn't work or you're confused about why it's not working, again, please reach out to us. We'd be happy to help and provide more context on what specifically is going wrong. But once that succeeds and it's good to go, you'll get a new screen that pops up and says, hey, everything looks good. It's time to migrate. And there's a Start Migration button right there. So if you go and click on that, that'll get things started. And then we're just going to be waiting for your data to sync at that point. And on that front, to monitor kind of where things are at, what we recommend is in the panel for your managed database, there's an Insights tab in there. When you click on that, you'll see a bunch of graphs. And one of those graphs is going to show you your disk usage and database size. If you look at what that is on your source database, and you look at this, they're going to be relatively similar. And I say relatively just because we do a logical migration so that we have higher compatibility with a larger number of source platforms. So like you don't need shell access, for example. But as part of that, when we're inserting the data, basically to do the actual migration, it's basically using queries to do that rather than like just taking the data and plopping it over, if that makes sense. So because MySQL is actually running like native insertion queries and everything, it's creating the data set fresh. So in some cases that can result in a smaller footprint. In other cases, it can result in a larger footprint. That can change a little bit between the two versions involved in the migration. But the key here is you're not looking for it to be exactly the same size because it's going to differ a little bit, but generally the same. And you'll see in the tool, or sorry, in the graph, as it keeps going, it should be going up, and then there should be a bit of a flat line after a certain point. And when you see that flat line, that's usually about when you'll see the replication kick in, at which point you can query the new managed database and look at seconds behind source, which will tell you, where replication is at, or again, just kind of look for that flat line, and that'll tell you when everything's good to go. So once you see that, and once you see seconds behind source or 0, and again, if you need any help from us on that, just let us know. Then we switch over to cutover. And let's talk a little bit about how we make sure that works well. And the biggest thing for cutover, next slide, thank you, Jim. Perfect. Application connectors. And this is one thing we'll want to talk about in advance as well. I'm just kind of here chronologically for steps, right? But we want to have a cutover plan in place before we actually get to this point. So kind of when you're working on the migration on your side for your databases and your applications, one of the key things that you want to think about is how many applications are connected, what does it take to switch their database connection to point to the database, how complicated is that process, what does it entail? In a really simple case where all you've got to do is change, one file, and that the file is consistently read like every time a connection is made. So the second it's updated, everything updates. You might be able to do this without any kind of downtime. In that case, we generally recommend make that change, set your source databases all to read only, from where you're coming from, so that just in case anything does route over there, it doesn't make any changes and there's no desynchronization, and no users that go and maybe make something new and think that it's going to persist. And we'd rather they get that error, know that if something wrong happened, that it happens, so that they can then make the change when everything's good to go. But again, cutover could be as simple as modifying a file. If it's more complicated, say that you have to modify a file and restart something on the application side, we recommend that you consider maybe scheduling some downtime or maintenance time and put your site in an applicable mode so that users can't either access it or at least can't do any writes or anything like that. If you have multiple applications, likewise, maybe a good idea to think about how long is that going to take and to plan for that appropriately. And again, talk to us. We'll be happy to get some feedback on it. Most of the customers I've worked with give a window of about 15, 20 minutes. They'll usually schedule downtime for it. A lot of times it takes them less than that, but at least everyone's ready to, for that in that case, right? So once everything's good, though, cutover's working, everything is good on your side, we recommend clicking the Stop Migration button or using our API to do the same. And that'll go ahead and unhook replication from your source cluster. And at that point, you can decommission your source at any time and enjoy your new DigitalOcean database. Does anyone have, actually, so we have a couple of questions in here. So are there, I think these are both database questions, it looks like. If I'm wrong, let me know. So I've got one here about how do we ensure complex projects involving transaction migration, not just masters. So Joe, we want to kind of jointly cover that because I'm imagining that's talking both maybe about a complex Kubernetes application and the database side of how to make sure everything's synchronized there, right?
Yeah, I wasn't quite sure on the, I wasn't sure which one they were covering. You want to cover the database side first? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think from a complex standpoint, from a database, migration, including like primaries and maybe secondaries, anything like that. So the key that we look over there is for cutover, right? So how are the queries working currently? So if you have a simple star topology, you've got a primary, multiple replicas. The critical thing there is going to be the primary. You want to make sure it doesn't accept any writes. And likewise, once it shifts over, right? For the replicas, if you're setting reads to the replicas, you can deploy replicas over here. We can set that up pretty much the same way. You want to make sure those route over to our side, as well, to make sure there's no stale reads or anything like that going on. If you have any kind of multi-primary situation, which I'm trying to figure out, like by complex there, what exactly is entailed. I think that's something we want to like look at the specific topology, right, to help out with. Joe, do you have any kind of recommendations on maybe the application or the doc side that you could do to help with that?
I mean, what I was thinking is that as we migrate the application, right, the database is going to get migrated over. The replication is going to be very close to 0 or very close to 0 seconds behind the master, and at that point, typically, like if downtime in the simplest kind of migration is that you're going to take downtime at that point, right? So you're going to stop any of writes going to your current primary. You're going to make that read only. You're going to make the current replication target be the primary, and then we're going to cut over DNS at that point, and then transact. At that point, as traffic starts to flow in again, then they'll start using that same database. We do have some other options if we can't do it in that such clean way of doing it, where we could potentially either set up a VPN, or we have a VPC interconnect, which allows us to provide a private network connectivity between, say, like AWS and DigitalOcean. And at that point, we could have, we don't necessarily have to cut over the database and the application traffic at the same time. We could do one or the other, where your application traffic is coming in, say, to DO, and then they're still reading database in another in your other cloud. That's all going to depend on the cloud, the latency, like a bunch of possibilities. But it's something that we can consider. So hopefully that covers what the question was asking. Do you want to move on to Himi's question?
Sure. Yeah. If there's any follow-up on the previous one, just feel free to let us know. We'll try to add anything else we can there. So what benchmarking tools should we do before thinking migration? So the standard one that I used a lot at MariaDB was Sysbench. When you set that up, there's an OLTP workload in there. There's a few ways to control, if you're doing a read-only, write-only, or a read-write split. The best thing you can do with that is to kind of get a better feel for what your application does. So if your application, most applications will be maybe 90% read, 10% write, which means 90% of them are about select queries or similar. Then maybe 10% of them are insert, update, delete, stuff like that. You don't have to even get too deep into the SQL side of that to figure that out. Even just think about what your application is doing and how you interact with it. I mentioned the idea before of like a ticketing system. In that, we tend to find that most interaction with the database there is going to be a read query, because most users are going to be reading the tickets and then kind of going over there. And then like responses or creating new tickets, those are all things that would entail writes. So the more that happens, the more that you'll have. But again, that 90-10 split is pretty common. 90% reads. So that's what we usually, I would say, to start with. But for any particular commands, again, feel free to reach out to us. And it looks like we've got some recommendations in here for using Kubernetes as well to help out, which would be great for that.
I was also going to mention we have a technology partner, LoadForge, who they do a really good job of being able to do application and database benchmarking as well.
Yeah, that's a great point, Joe.
Yeah, and just want to add, for the Kubernetes specific benchmarking tools, you can use KubeBench to access the Kubernetes security and configuration, and even the metric server to track the real-time cluster performance of your CPU, RAM, and even the network utilization. So you can make use of that. And also K6 or Locust is there for the application level performance or load testing inside the Kubernetes, what you can do to do the before testing and before the migration process. So you can do that.
Yeah, we'll want to do that for the migration in general, right? Because what we want to do is we want to see what the performance difference is going to be in the new environment versus the old environment. And often we could potentially tune things a bit, right? Like you're not going to exactly see the same performance on the same worker node, or like on worker nodes in DigitalOcean, you're going to see elsewhere. We often have a better price performance than the other clouds. So you might find that we need smaller workers. You might find you need smaller database, instance types or VM types to run your workload. So we can sort all that out through benchmarking.
That's a good point too about tuning as well, Joe, and about kind of the whole process as well. Well, the process of setting up and performing a migration can be quick, and we're absolutely here to facilitate that. For something that's really critical, we definitely recommend reach out to us, talk to our team members as early as you can, engage with us, at the earliest stage that makes sense. That's where we're happy to work with you on a POC. Really check everything out, make sure everything's working well. If we find any issues with compatibility, or we find issues with, performance or anything that we might need to tune or adjust on our side before you're ready to move everything over, we detect that early in the process. DigitalOcean is a very fast-moving company. It's pretty likely that if we don't have a solution right away, that we can work on one, so that by the time you're actually ready to make the move, that everything's good to go. We can also retest before you do that as well. I just want to bring that up to you because that's something I think that we can all work on, and kind of keep in mind on that front too.
Great. Thank you guys so much. If there are no other questions, or Joe, Purnima, and Rob, if you guys don't have anything else, we can go ahead and wrap up. And then this will live stream has been recorded, and so it will also be available on YouTube and via StreamYard. So thank you so much to our panelists. That was awesome.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great
Bye-bye.
Monday. Bye.